This is Prabhupada's personal car for Bombay. These cars were personally purchased by myself in Calcutta, 1975. Prabhupada gave me the money to purchase 3 cars, one for each center, Vrindavan, Bombay, and Mayapur. And he wanted these cars made, and because the foreign cars were not able to ride nicely on Indian roads. So I went to Mr. Birla's factory outside of Calcutta and asked him for 3 cars, because at that time there was a waiting list of 7,000 people. In the early days you couldn't just go buy a car in India. You had to go on a waiting list because the government told the factories how many cars they could make. They could not make what they wanted to make. So I didn't want to wait for Prabhupada cars. He wanted them immediately. So I went to Mr. Birla and I asked him, can you give me 4 cars, because I ordered one for the Calcutta temple also. And he said, okay. And immediately that day, I was given the cars. Each car at that time cost 28,000 rupees only. It's 1975. However, when you buy these cars in those days, there was no quality control. So I wanted Prabhupada to feel most comfortable in his cars, and therefore I took the entire cars apart. We took out all the insides, everything, even the engine we took out, and we rebuilt the entire car, especially by insulation. Prabhupada didn't like noises, and he didn't like to bounce. Actually, they say these ambassadors will last forever if you just keep enough oil. Prabhupada told me that. When I first bought the cars, he said, keep enough oil and they will drive forever. And even in the material sense, Prabhupada's words about the ambassador car are true. Because now it is 2003, which is almost 40 years, and still this car is riding very nicely. So we should never underestimate the orders of the spiritual master, even on most trivial matters. We are here at the Rath Yatra ceremony for commemorating the 25th anniversary of the opening of the Juhu temple. And this is the original vehicle that Prabhupada had from 1975. We have preserved it. However, in its original state, this car had many lotus flowers on the car, as well as tilaks in chrome and lights underneath, as well as flags. We put ISKCON flags in the front of the car with a chrome tilak, showing that this was the most unique vehicle in 1975. Whenever this car rode down the road, everybody would look at it because it was completely different from any other car.
For us, Bombay was a very important place. The Prabhupada said that Mayapur was Vrindavan was his home, Bombay was his office, and Mayapur was his place of worship. So for us in Mayapur, Bombay was a very, very important place. It was one of the important places that the Prabhupada was related with. He mentioned that because Bombay was the most modernized financial powerhouse in India, that it was also becoming the most westernized. This was the home of the Bollywood, cinema, so many different factors. So he wanted to establish a temple which was going to, had a mission. This temple is not an ordinary temple. This mission this temple has a mission to stop the westernization or to preserve the Krishna consciousness of India, especially here in Bombay, and from Bombay the idea would help to preserve it all over India. Sometime Prabhupada would confide in us how his Guru Maharaj had ordered him to preach in the West, to bring Krishna consciousness around the world, to preach in English language. And he said that my Guru didn't specifically order me to preach in India. So whenever I preached in the West, I was very successful. So his idea was to build temple in Vrindavan, in Mayapur, for his Western devotees to come and visit the holy places. But then he said, how could he stand by and see India going to hell? Seeing how Indians were giving up their culture, following the West, and becoming degraded in various ways and losing Krishna consciousness. So he said it was his personal mission that he was preaching in India. So those...
He also said that Lord Washington in Los Angeles spoke to him and sent him to India, although it wasn't his plan. It's in the conversation. It wasn't his plan, it was his Guru Maharaj's plan, but it was...
I said, Lord Dwarka, I don't know if you heard what Brahmananda Prabhu said. He said something I didn't even know about. It's that Lord Dwarkadish in Los Angeles, the deity personally spoke to Prabhupada and ordered him, although it wasn't his Guru Maharaj's plan, but Krishna himself spoke, that you have to go back to India and you have to organize the preaching there. Haribo!
So at that time, again, this was the very end of 72, the beginning of 73. Prabhupada stayed about 5 weeks in Bombay at that time. And the devotees here, the sannyasis, Gargamuni, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, so many, they were busy making life members. You know, this is how money was coming in at that time, a life membership program. And some of you remember it was 1,111 rupees, you would become a life member. And by doing that, you would get all of Prabhupada's books, all of Prabhupada's future books, and you would get to stay in any temple in the world. It was a very good deal. The only thing is, we weren't giving them anything. We were taking, we were taking the money, but they weren't getting the books. And letters were coming in from some of these Indian life members. They were complaining to Prabhupada, your disciples, they've come, they promised us so many things, and now they're not giving us. The books aren't there, and they wanted the books, of course. And so Prabhupada called a meeting. I remember one day at Mahadevi's flat, and he brought in his disciples. As I said, by this time I had already had malaria and jaundice. I wasn't so happy in India. So Prabhupada called this meeting and he said, what's going on? He said, there's all these life members, they're complaining. They're not getting anything. They're taking their money and you're not providing them with the books. He said, and they're complaining. He said, there's no bookkeeping. He said, do you have records of what's going on? He said, this is very important. He said, if we can't get this together here, he said, we may as well pack our bags and leave India. I had a big smile on my face. I thought, Prabhupada's going to pack up and leave India. Prabhupada sometimes would be very dramatic. He would make his point by saying these very startling things, but I was new with Prabhupada. I was only with him for a few months, and I thought, this is great, we're going to leave India. We'll just go back to America where everything is nice and clean and organized. But he was trying to impress upon him how serious it was. He says, we have to, he says, we must take care of things here. So.
in Bombay, in Calcutta, in Mayapur. When we went to live in Mayapur, there was no electricity. This land, you know, I went to see the man. I was the first one to meet that man that owned this land. I made him a life member. I didn't make anybody anything. He became a life member out of his... Anyway, I went there, it was a Saturday. And I walked in the room and it was Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. So when I went in, I said, Jai Mahatma. And he liked that, and he became the life member. We have our Mahatma Gandhi here. That's another story. We tried to remove him once, but there was a riot. We didn't know that he was a national hero. You know? So this is what Prabhupada taught us. Prabhupada taught us, if somebody is not a devotee, they're not genuinely devoted to God. In order to be genuinely devoted to God, one has to see God in everything. And he appreciates it. That's the difference between a devotee and a demon. A devotee appreciates life. He can appreciate a coconut, a glass of orange juice, the breeze, the light. The light is coming from the Brahma Jyoti. This is a material sun, but it is coming as a reflection of the jivas that are billions and trillions living there with their body reflection. The devotee knows, he appreciates, and in this way he remembers Krishna, in this way. So a devotee is one who sees life in this way. And if one doesn't, Duskritino Mudha Naradama Maya Pratigyana. Srila Prabhupada taught us that way. So sometimes we forget, we did not remember that everybody is the servant of Krishna. Some are just covered more, some are covered less. So Srila Prabhupada taught us all of these things.
Then I said, I'm here for 10 minutes for initiation. And quickly, he gave me my name, and my name is Harit. No, when he made me sit to initiation, the Tulsidas was another president. He tried to say, Prabhupada, he's a thief. He just come in the temple, you're giving initiation. Prabhupada looked back, keep quiet, I know what I'm doing. Then from other side of the Vyasasana or back, Giriraj Maharaj came to tell something. Prabhupada just gave a look and Giriraj Maharaj gone back. I said, Maharaj, Prabhupada, he said, do you know 4 principles? I said, no. Then Giriraj said, Haridas, you know, no meat eating, no tea and all. I said, yeah, those I know. He said, what is your name? I said, my name, I don't know, because I was like a street bastard. And nobody knows my name, so street boy, right from the, Everybody would call me different name, Chotu, Kalu, Malu, anything. Whichever area I go for pickpocketing, I get my name because I don't know my name. Every time I get caught, police ask me, what is your name? Anything comes to my mind, I tell, that's my name. Anyway, wait. So I said, but Giriraj Maharaj, one of the day he came, he said, listen, mister, today is a very good day. Will you like to shave your head? I said, what is a good day? He said, Haridas Thakur's appearance day or disappearance, something. He said. I said, go ahead, come on, good. So from today, we call you Haridas. So I told this incident to Prabhupada. I don't know my name, Giriraj Maharaj called me Haridas. He said, keep that name and follow his life. So the first movie I made is Haridas Thakur.
Actually, my initiation was not personally with Srila Prabhupada, but for me it was a very significant point in my life, because I had been a devotee for 6 months, and that was usually, at that time, you could get initiation after 6 months. So after 6 months, I went to my authority and said, okay, I want to have initiation now. I've been a devotee for 6 months. So then my authority said, no, you have to wait for your husband. He joined 2 months after you. You have to wait another 2 months. So I said, okay, I waited another 2 months. So I waited another 2 months. I asked my husband, okay, let's get initiated now. And my husband said, I'm not ready. So I said, well, I'm not waiting any longer. And so I asked my authorities, they said, okay. I wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada. And I quoted a verse from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We had maybe first and a few chapters from second canto. The canto was third chapter of second canto. And the verse was about, if you don't get the dust of the lotus feet of the pure devotee, then you're like a dead body. So I wrote to Srila Prabhupada, I quoted this verse, and I said, if I don't get initiation from you, Srila Prabhupada, then what is the use of my life? So he initiated me, and he wrote back, and he said, yes. He said, first birth is from your father and mother, but second birth is from your spiritual master. So now I am your father, and now your path is open to go back to home, back to Godhead. So then he said to me, how to go quickly on this path back to home, back to Godhead. He gave me 6 instructions in my initiation letter. And those 6 instructions were, always chant at least 16 rounds, study all our books, go on Sankirtan, and always do deity worship, and follow strictly the regulative principles. And then the last one, which is very hard and which I'm having difficulty doing, he said 24 hours be engaged in Krishna's service, and your rapid advancement will be certain. Then he wrote me a second letter very shortly after that, telling me how to do all these things, with what quality. He said you should always be enthusiastic, work sincerely, and cooperate with the other devotees. So this was Srila Prabhupada. He always took care of us personally, our spiritual life.
My first sight of Srila Prabhupada was in Detroit in 1971 when he arrived at the airport. I had come there with Hari Griva and Kirtananda from New Vrindavan, and we welcomed Prabhupada. As he came out of the jetway, there was about 350 devotees welcoming him. And the moment that he stepped out of the door into our sight, everyone began to cry. There was a wave of transcendental emotion that just went throughout the entire room, and anyone who was there will remember it. The next thing I remember was Prabhupada sitting down in that lounge, and the first words out of his mouth were, "You are not that body." And they just pierced my heart, along with everybody else's there. And Jaduma Swami and I always mention it to each other, that we recall that one moment as being so extraordinary for everybody. And then he was driven back to the temple, and I spent the next 3 hours crying my heart out, being relieved, knowing my spiritual father had come back to once again try to extract me from the material world. And that was my first experience of Prabhupada.
When I went to receive the Gayatri mantra from Srila Prabhupada, it was in his room in Vrindavan in 1976. And so when I came into the Prabhupada's room, I paid my obeisances and chanted the pranam mantra. And after the pranam mantra, I said in a loud voice, "Jai Srila Prabhupada." And Prabhupada immediately responded, "Jai Srila Prabhupada." And just for a split second, once bewildered by this, and of course I immediately realized that his Srila Prabhupada was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And so what it indicated to me was that whatever honor that we gave to Srila Prabhupada, whatever respect, he was passing that on to his spiritual master in the line of disciplic succession to Krishna himself. So that was Srila Prabhupada's great quality as a pure devotee of the Lord, that he was the transparent via medium to Krishna and to the parampara.
Although he was doing everything, he would give you the credit. Like when I got to Los Angeles Temple, I remember in the opening lecture, Prabhupada said, all glories to Gargamuni when he said this, Jai Om Vishnu Power Paramount. He said, all glories to Gargamuni, all glories to, because I got the LA temple. But I knew that actually he got the temple, but he was giving me the credit, And that's one thing devotees sometimes forget. They think they're doing things, you see, but actually it's Prabhupada doing it through you, and then he gives you the credit. Just like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna was on the battlefield and he was doing everything. But because Arjuna surrendered to Krishna, Krishna gave him the credit. So although I knew in my mind Prabhupada was giving the credit, that's why I got very emotional when Prabhupada said, Jai, all glories to God, because I knew I didn't do this. Prabhupada did it. And then I get so upset because why does Prabhupada do this? He never takes the credit for anything. And yet he's doing it all. And that's why, to be with Prabhupada is the most wonderful experience because he'll never cheat you.
It started with, he used us because we were his instruments. So we were used, but he confirmed everything. One Saturday I went to make a life member. And in those days, nobody knew us. They didn't trust us. We were 19, 20, 21, 22. We were a bunch of kids, skinny. Like one story, I went to this office and they began to question me, these men, and I didn't really know what, they started to say Karna was the hero of the Mahabharata. And I didn't know what to say. I became angry. I said, what? No, it's Arjuna and Krishna. And they said, no, it's Karna. And this way they really agitated me. And so I said, he said, look, you're getting angry, And so what has this guru done for you? You're getting angry. So I thought for a minute and I said, well, a year ago I'd have punched you in the face. Now I control myself a little bit. So they like that. Actually, they like that. I became a member because of that. And another man who went to see, I was calling the phone, and this is the Parley Glucose people, the Chauhan brothers. They own the Gold Spot and all the Parley thing. So I went there, and there was 8 minutes late. And a big office, and this man, I wasn't used to this, he was sitting in a suit in a fancy office, Western style. He's a big man, this guy. I didn't know he was a big man. He said, I was going to give you 10 minutes on my schedule. You're 8 minutes late. You have 2 minutes. What do you want? So I just opened the briefcase and dumped it on the desk and said, why don't you be a member and we'll give you these books. And he just looked at me and said, oh, that's very good. I would hire you if you were in sales. So he became the member. And then I went back to the temple and I lost the check. So I had to call him up again and he laughed. So this is what Srila Prabhupada was dealing with.
So before we went in, Pushta Krishna and Harishari Prabhu, they were giving us the threads, the Brahman threads. And so they put the Brahman thread on you and then you went in. And and they also gave you this sheet to read the mantra as Prabhupada gave the mantra. So I was reading along with Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada skipped a line in the mantra. What to do? So I looked at the sheet, and I decided I was going to say what was on the sheet. It's a big offense, actually, to correct the spiritual master. And so I read the next word, and Srila Prabhupada stopped. and he made this kind of sound, well, like, what is this, you know? And I didn't dare look at him, and I kept on looking at the sheet, see? So I played stupid, which I was, actually. And so then Prabhupada must have looked, and actually Prabhupada corrected himself. And he actually read the line that I was on, and then we finished the mantra. So then came the part where the thread. So Prabhupada said, where's the thread? So I already had the thread on. This got another, you know, kind of, what kind of people are these, you know? What kind of person is this? So I took the thread off, and then Prabhupada put the thread back on again. And so that was that. Now the sequel to the story is that actually what was happening with the threads is that Pushta Krishna, he wanted to save time. And these threads, they come all bundled up in these little things. And sometimes if you try to take them apart, they get all tangled up. And so Pushta Krishna wanted to save time by doing this. And so Hari Sori was helping him with this. So when Hari Sori, when he went on to Melbourne, which was the next stop, they had another initiation ceremony. And so Hari Sori did the same thing this time. He put the Brahmin thread on, and you know, the person went in. And then the person came out again and said, Prabhupada was very upset. He said, who is giving this Brahmin thread? He said, I give the Brahmin thread. I am the guru. And that was the sequel to the story of that Hari Sori got chastised for.
My first experience of Srila Prabhupada's anger was when we went from Madras to Vishakhapatnam. His godbrother, Bhaktivedanta Puri Maharaj, called on the telephone. I was upstairs. I was not feeling very well. Srila Prabhupada was in his room, and Shamsundar was there. And someone said, there's a phone call for Srila Prabhupada. And Shamsundar came out the door and said, who is it? Oh, it's Puri Maharaj from Vishakhapatnam. And all of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada ran down the stairs, got on the phone, and started speaking very loudly and joyfully in Bengali. And within 6 hours, we were all on a train to Vishakhapatnam on the coast of South India. And when we arrived, we were served very nice prasadam. And I was brahmachari, and we always didn't get very nice Krishna conscious prasadam because sometimes we were invited to people's houses. And it was excellent prasadam, and we all stuffed ourselves and slept through Mangal Arati the next morning. And we were staying in these little bhajan kutirs outside of the mat, and Prabhupada came out with his cane. He was opening the doors and yelling at the brahmacharis, get to Mangal Arati, why aren't you at Mangal Arati? So I thought I could make it just in time before Prabhupada got to my door. And I didn't. And the door opened, he opened it with his cane, and I paid my obeisances, Namam Vishnu Pradaya Krishna. He didn't care for my prayer. He said, if you cannot get up in the morning, then do not eat at night. And I said, it was the first time I ever experienced his chastisement. And I was like, I thought my spiritual life was finished. So I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada. And I ran to Mangal Arati. And so Srila Prabhupada what Srila Prabhupada did was use all of his emotions perfectly in the service of Krishna.
We were spending a little time with Prabhupada's godbrother, Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj, who he had a very affectionate relationship with. So he was telling us the story of Prabhupada's taking sannyas. And he said, yes, he said, the ceremony was going on. He said Keshava Maharaj was conducting the initiation. Narayan Maharaj was chanting the mantras, and I was doing bhajan. He says, but as is my habit, I got a little too loud. So Keshava Maharaj was making a gesture like this, not so loud. He said, and as soon as he would turn his head, he said, your Prabhupada would go like this. And then he laughed, he was always laughing. And he said, it was then I knew he would be the leader of the Hare Krishna movement. And then, this is years later now in Dallas, when the airport was the main airport was Love Field, you remember. And So we were escorting Prabhupada to the airport, and as we moved through the airport terminal, there was one of these moving sidewalks. And Prabhupada was gliding along on the sidewalk, and then the kirtan was roaring along on either side of the sidewalk. Right through and I took over the kirtan and began leading it, got a little bold. And as we entered the main terminal, I thought, okay, I better, bring this kirtan to a close, because all the people were looking really startled. And I started to wind down the kirtan the way you do, with the kind of signaling the mridungas. And Prabhupada saw what I was going to do, and immediately he looked at me, and he went like that, same gesture. Come on. So then we all sat down in the terminal and continued the kirtan. So I was just thinking, how he always, if there was chanting, that was his life and soul, under all circumstances.
But how much Prabhupada was very personally related with these deities. We know that he established the Mayapur Vrindavan Trust. In that trust he said that 30% is for, in case ISKCON ever, at that time in India, we weren't so well established, but whatever it may be, he wanted that there be some kind of a perpetual seva security for the deities, and especially he mentioned 30% for Radharas Bihari, 30% for Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram, Radhisham deities, and 30% for Mayapur, Radhamadhava, Panchatattva deities, and 10% for Hyderabad. So all these things showing that how these deities here in Mumbai, Prabhupada was so much related with them very intimately.
So some experiences in Calcutta Temple. I was doing Mangalarti one day, and Srila Prabhupada came for Mangalarti, but I didn't know it, and he was standing right behind me. The deity room was on the same level with the rest of the temple, and the only thing separating the deity room was a thin rope covered with velvet, a chain covered with velvet. So I was doing the arti to the deities, and then I turned around, I had the ghee lamp, and there was Prabhupada standing just a few inches behind me. And I didn't know what to do. Should I do arti, or should I give him the ghee lamp, or what should I do? I was just completely flustered. So then I think I did both, a combination of both, and someone took the ghee lamp, and then the whole arti, Srila Prabhupada was standing right behind me. And at that moment, I realized that I was doing my arti so nicely at that time, because Srila Prabhupada was standing behind me. So I thought, well, I should do all my service like this, as if Srila Prabhupada was standing behind me, watching whatever I do. And actually, that's a fact, that Srila Prabhupada is with us, and he's watching, and he's guiding us. Even though he has left this planet, he's still with us today.
There was a room full of Indians, visitors in Vrindavan. And Kundali was there fanning Prabhupada with chamara. All of a sudden the door burst open, and it was Vishal and Vishalini carrying these platters of Simply Wonderfuls. And at the top of his voice, he announces as he bursts into the door, "Simply Wonderfuls for a Simply Wonderful spiritual master." So Prabhupada started grinning, because he was often highly entertained by Vishal. So he was grinning away, and then Vishal and his wife, they went around distributing Simply Wonderfuls to everybody in the room. Then Vishal took one of Prabhupada's books off of, there's bookshelves all around the room, and he took one of the books off the shelves, opened it up, and began to glorify Prabhupada and all of his books and his writing, and what a fantastic personality Prabhupada was. And then he went around and distributed books to the people in the room and got donations. And Kundali was describing that his mind was completely blown by all of this, because he'd never seen anybody act like this around Prabhupada. So then he finished up his little preaching, and book distribution excursion. Prabhupada the whole time was just smiling and nodding his head. And then Vishal said to Prabhupada on his way out, he said, "Prabhupada, just one thing." "Yes?" He said, "I haven't got 7.3 yet." Srimad Bhagavatam, 7.3. "I haven't got 7.3 yet. Can I borrow yours?" Prabhupada said, "Take it." So that was one about Vishal. Another time, Vishal used to, whenever Prabhupada used to circumambulate the temple in the morning in Vrindavan, Vishal would be standing with his hands folded, chanting all these prayers from the Bhagavatam. We think that you're good, and giving the English translations. Well, on this particular morning, there was all this water because it had rained, and it was just, sheeting on the temple step area. And Prabhupada just snapped at Vishal. He said, do something practical. He said, clean this up. So that was his response to the glorification. He ordered him to do some cleaning.
Prabhupada never made you feel bad. He never did or said anything to make you feel bad. He always made you feel good. And even if he said something, like some of the servants who served Prabhupada, they say he was strict and he would say something. Later on, he would come back with something very kind and very nice, Because in all circumstances, the closer you got to Prabhupada, the more he would teach you about life and about serving Krishna and your responsibility to the Guru. You see, it's a never-ending process of surrender. And with some of us, including myself, it's very hard to surrender when you're conditioned to act on impulse, to act on the basis of your senses. So Prabhupada was able to supersede all of these things and just take all your good things in a charming way and engage them in Krishna's service, and then make you feel like a human being, like you're an important person in the service of Krishna. Because self-esteem is something that many devotees lack. And yet, Prabhupada had the most self-esteem. He was very proud to be a servant of Krishna, and you could see that. So, Prabhupada would make you feel important when you were a servant of Krishna, you see.
So I went from New Vrindavan to New York, where I began a service at the press. I started making a film on the Bhagavad Gita with animation, and I was also distributing magazines in the subways and doing Harinam. And I was also hearing Prabhupada's lectures at that time, because he was there saying, eat less, sleep less, these material necessities are something we can reduce. And I took it as gospel, and that's what I did. I would, refuse to eat more than one chapati at a meal, or have more than one cup of dal, or, have more one serving, whatever's put on my plate of sabji, and that was it. And at that time, we didn't get any sweets unless it was Sunday. So Prabhupada, meanwhile, noticed me amongst the devotees listening to his lectures, unknown to me. And years later, I found out that he told Kurandar, who is this young boy? Please make sure he gets more prasadam. So, the following days at the temple, devotees were coming up to me during lunch, and they were saying, would you like my chapati? Would you like, I can give you some of my dal? And I was thinking, this is how Maya works. She comes at you like this, and she's just tempting you. But Prabhupada's saying, no, eat less, sleep less. I was down to 4 hours, a night of sleep. And so I would say, no, thank you very much, because I saw, this is Maya working. Meanwhile, my aunt came to New York, and she saw me at the temple. She came over, and she noticed that I was very thin, and she was alarmed, and so she called my mother in Chicago. And by the time my mother had made arrangements to come to New York, because she was worried to actually check out the situation, I had lost even more weight. I was now down to 108 pounds from 180. And after some time there, some letters started arriving on a regular basis, 2 or 3 or 4 a week, to Srila Prabhupada from my mother, asking about my welfare and holding him responsible for the fact that I had become so sick, even though it was my own undoing in the New York temple and my own state of consciousness that had gotten it that way. So Kurandar became concerned. He was the temple president, because he had gotten wind of what had happened to the incense business in New York based on the, hell hath no fury like my mother's wrath. when she sees her son being somehow not taken care of properly. And so he approached me after a few months in LA and said that he felt it was better if I left and went home instead of serving. And I said, but Prabhupada's instructions are that association of devotees should never be given up. Otherwise, you will definitely fall into Maya, and it would be very difficult to return. And he was insistent that I leave, and for the first time in my devotional life, I was insistent that I would not leave. So the next morning, he came to me and said that Srila Prabhupada wanted to see me. And I was very fearful because I said, oh my God, what have I done wrong? I've obviously, the first time now, I've said no to a temple authority, and immediately Prabhupada wants to see me. And of course it's all mercy, but at the time I was I was pretty frightened as I walked up those steps to his quarters. I'd never been up there before. I'd never been even on one of his morning walks. I always felt that, that the whole idea of in separation from the spiritual master was a higher principle. So I was always in the kitchen cleaning pots, or something like that. So here I was entering his room, and he was taking prasadam. And I offer my obeisances, and he looks up at me, and he's got these big compassionate eyes. And I have no idea what he's thinking. And he says, there's some difficulty with your mother. And, I don't disagree with the spiritual master. I agree with him. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he said, she wants you to go home for some time. I said, yes, she does, Prabhupada. He said, so you can go home for some time? No, I'm not going to say no. I said, yes, but I was really worried. I said, what is Prabhupada, thinking, I'm not supposed to leave this temple or this association. And then he said, I'm going to give you this name. I'm going to initiate you with the name Nishringananda Das. And that way, you'll always be protected from your parents. And then you can go home for some time and come back. I was stunned. Then his hand came from the plate with some prasad. Here, take. And he put this prasadam into my hand. And I took the prasadam, and he said, so then, you can eat vegetarian at home? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, then what is the difficulty? And with that, I paid my obeisances. I went out. My name was entered in the book, according to the secretary. And I was making arrangements to go back to Chicago, where when I arrived at the airport, one sister grabbed one arm and one sister grabbed another, and I saw them like two Maya Devis taking me away from devotees. And I was bewildered. How could the spiritual master be sending me away? But in due course of time, the experience that I had was that Prabhupada had shown compassion not just to me and to what my needs were, but also to my mother. He wasn't operating out of fear of anything that was happening. He was genuinely understanding what was best for the situation. And the proof is that, I came back and rejoined devotional service and began to, make films for Krishna and do exactly what in his letters he had recommended me to do. And meanwhile, my mother was satisfied because I'd come home and I'd, shown that I could live a regular material life while chanting and carrying on with things. I think I was one of the first devotees to actually live at home for a while, have a job, and still be initiated. And when I came back in good standing and was able to carry on. What it showed me was that Prabhupada knew, according to time and circumstance, exactly what to do, despite what the scriptures may say. The job of the spiritual master is to give proper guidance. And nobody had greater understanding or compassion than Srila Prabhupada, because he knew past, present, and future. That was his potency. And those of us who experienced it and how it entered into us, we really realized that Prabhupada indeed he was a Vaikuntha man. He wasn't an ordinary mortal. And to this day, I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He looked at me. His eyes were so deep. They had such a sense of not just compassion, but sympathy for my situation. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He tried to make it easy. He gave me a name that made it easy. With that name, I knew, okay, I may have difficulty, but I got the name of Sringana. I'm always going to be protected. And as it turns out, my mother ended up, though she went in the direction for some time of joining the anti-cult movement and making sure that other people were not taken advantage of, and we know that in many cults, a lot of people were taken advantage of by unscrupulous leadership. But in our case, and even in our own movement, we had our own problems amongst our own leaders. But in the case of Srila Prabhupada, he made that instruction in such a way that I was able to come through that. My mother was able to work her way through that over the years. And in 1999, she came with me to Vrindavan, celebrated her birthday, sat at the feet of Prabhupada's Murti, saw his samadhi, paid her respects. You know, it was a beautiful trip. And to me, it was the ultimate affirmation that Prabhupada's compassion could carry anyone over the ocean of doubt and illusion. It was a fantastic moment for me to have her there in Vrindavan amongst the devotees, and she loved it. She said this was the best trip I ever took in my life. The month she spent with me in India, it was very rewarding.
So at that time, of course, I was dressed in rags, and Prabhupada noticed. And somehow or other, when I was offering obeisances, I was trying to cover up the holes in my sari. So Srila Prabhupada must have noticed, because about 4 days later, one of our Richest Life members came up to me and he said, "I'm going to take you shopping for saris." So he took me to 4 or 5 sari shops, and I could just take whatever I wanted. And ever since that day, I have no problem for saris. Srila Prabhupada knows everything.
So here in Juhu, of course, for me, I always had a nice situation. It was one of the things, being with Srila Prabhupada, as Prabhupada would say, you're a servant of the king, you live just like the king. So I was always taken care of very nicely while I was with Srila Prabhupada. One of the things I remember, we're always getting into trouble, Prabhupada's entourage. And also we would take pleasure, it would seem, when Prabhupada would call us sometimes onto the carpet. I remember it was here in Juhu. I said the beach was very nice back then in '74. And at that time, Paramahamsa was Prabhupada's secretary. And Prabhupada would take lunch and take a short nap. So during that time, we all started going to the beach. And we would sit on the beach and go in the water, take bath before lunch. Well, within a few days, Nitai dropped out, said he had too much work to do. And then Paramahamsa, who was the secretary, said he had to catch up on his letters, typing the letters. So I continued to go to the beach every day. And I came back one day, and Paramahamsa came up to me and he said, "Prabhupada wants to see you, and he's really mad." And this was like, this was always going on. Prabhupada was really mad. He was always really mad at, we were always doing something wrong. So he said he heard you're going to the beach all by yourself, and he's upset. So Prabhupada took lunch. So I was very nervous. I waited for him to finish lunch, and then I went in to his room. I offered obeisances, and I looked up. I said, "Prabhupada, did you want to see me?" And he looked at me and he said, "No." I said, "Paramahamsa said that you wanted to see me?" And he said, "No." I said, "Maharaj said that you were angry with me because I'm going to the beach." He said, "Oh, you're going to the beach?" I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." He said, "Are you going alone?" I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." He said, "Oh." He said, "You having a good time?" I said, "Yes, Prabhupada, it's nice to go in the water." He said, "Yes, the beach is very nice here." He said, "This beach is very good." He said, "You should go." He said, "It's okay, you go." I said, "Okay, Prabhupada." I never went to the beach again after that day. As I said, with me, he took a different approach. Prabhupada yelled at me on a few occasions, and he could see that I just become totally devastated. So this was his approach now, is to just say everything was okay and then allow me to do the right thing, already knowing that he didn't want me to do it because Paramahamsa, is that story, is it? You would know, right? It's like what they say, the Bengali the Bengali stepdaughter, you know. When the family, they want to yell at her, they yell at their own daughter, and she hears, you know. So Prabhupada would yell at me, but he wouldn't yell at me. He would tell them, and then when I would go in, he would say, no, everything is fine. You do, it's okay. But I would get the message, so yeah, I stopped going to the beach at that time.
We visited Prabhupada we went with some Gurukula students on traveling Sankirtan. Dwarkadish was with us, Ekendra, and Jagadananda Pandit, I think, was with us. Anyway, a few of the boys. They're all men in their 40s, I guess, now. But we went to the Henry Street Temple in New York to get Prabhupada's darshan, and Sri Galim had headed up the party, and he was telling Prabhupada about some of the book distribution figures that the boys had. Actually, Dwarkadish was always the top distributor. So he was telling him a little bit about that, and while he was talking to him, Prabhupada was just sitting with no shirt, and had this golden goblet that he was drinking water out of. I'd never seen that before, where he drank the water kind of like in this stream. I couldn't figure out how he didn't choke, or he had this very gracefully. And a Trey Rishi had managed to get some kind of film unit in to film Prabhupada while we were having this meeting. And Prabhupada really didn't like it because he had no shirt on, and he didn't like it. I mean, I didn't quite understand it at the time, but it came very clear. He didn't like the informality of being filmed topless. So he got very irritated with the Trey Rishi. Just stop it, remove them. So they were removed. So then he seemed to be like in a pretty irritated mood, so I was afraid to ask him anything. I had questions I wanted to ask him, but I couldn't ask him at that point. So then we had our little darshan and went out, and I thought, I really want to go back and ask Prabhupada. So I went to the secretary. I think it was Nanda Kumar. Was it Nanda Kumar? Yeah. I think that's who it was at the time. And said, I really want to ask Prabhupada some questions about teaching. And he said, all right, come on. So Prabhupada said, who is that? And he said, it's one of the Gurukula teachers, Prabhupada. So he said, come in. So I was in the room alone with Prabhupada. I was a little... And then the only question I could think to ask him, I said, it's so difficult to get the students to do anything. How can we convince them to do what we ask them to do? Because we really didn't have a clue, what was the right way to do things. So he looked at me very compassionately and said, you speak to them like this. You say, you see how this particular student, pointing to some other student, how he's doing this so nicely? He said, you should do it like that and you'll become happy. And in my mind, I was thinking, that's it? But that was his, and I found, though, that this particular piece of advice had a tremendous amount of practical application, because it was a fact that if you could point to another student who they respected or at least thought was a worthy person and convince them that this was the right sort of behavior, then just by pointing to that person and saying, please, you do it this way and you'll be happy. That was the other half of the message. If you do like that, you'll be happy. So if you follow the person setting the nice example, you'll become happy.
I was there present when Sridhar Maharaj asked for permission to get sannyas of Prabhupada. I was sitting in the room and Prabhupada gave him permission. I think finally gave him in Vrindavan, though. That was interesting. I mean, Prabhupada said, are you 100% sure you can, be a sannyasi? And then Sridhar Maharaj, that he was very humble, and he said, well, no, I'm not 100% sure that I can. Are you 75% sure? He said, 75% sure. I'm not 75% sure either. So, are you 50% sure? So I'm 50% sure. And then he said, okay, well then I'll give you a sannyas. I think Prabhupada, of course, he knew his heart, but he wanted to get a...
Another story was here, that one devotee came with me. We had a pandal in the Cross Maidan. And so this devotee, he had just taken sannyas. But his ex-wife showed up. And he was very agitated and disturbed. So he went to Srila Prabhupada and he said, Srila Prabhupada, my ex-wife has come here, can you kick her out? You have to tell her to go. And Srila Prabhupada said, why are you disturbed by this one woman? There are 2 billion women in the world. Why does this one woman bother you? He said, the reason is because you've had sex with her. That is why it bothers you. Otherwise, she wouldn't bother you. And then he said in his humble way, he said, what can I do? She is also my disciple. If I tell her to leave, she will become discouraged. He said, you just have to tolerate this. So in this way, he saw everybody adjusted for everybody. He did not make any distinction.
And in the lecture that he gave, I don't remember most of the lecture, but the one line he spoke, which was really interesting, he said, this is a movement for the living entity. And I was thinking how, generally we talk about saving the human beings, but he was, describing the movement as a movement for all living entities. So that really struck me.
Speaking of strength, spiritual strength, once Vishnu Jan asked Srila Prabhupada about spiritual strength. He said, Srila Prabhupada, how do you measure spiritual strength? And Prabhupada said, with car towels.
Prabhupada would speak to us about different things. And one thing I remembered he spoke to us was about the Babajis in Vrindavan. He said that be careful about the Babajis. They are called Markat Vairagya. It's just like in Vrindavan, you see there are many, many monkeys. And these monkeys have many, many wives. They may appear very renounced. They're vegetarian, they don't wear any clothes, but they have many, many wives. So in the same way, he said, these Babajis, they appear very renounced, but actually they have many, many wives. So be careful and don't associate with them.
In Vrindavan in 1976, Prabhupada was touring the Gurukula building that was being constructed. It was quite a large edifice, and there had been all this discussion about who was going to have what room. Which person was going to be in which room, and this manager was going to be here, and this person was going to be there. And Prabhupada didn't like it. And he began to reflect on what had happened in the Gaudiya Math at the time of Bhaktisiddhanta, when there was all this argument about the Bhagbazar temple. And so Prabhupada said, this building was built to accommodate students. He said, not that 500 managers and 50 students. He said, that is the philosophy of shotgun and mosquito, that you use a shotgun to kill a mosquito. Well, that was, just remember that particular line.
One day I was in his room in Calcutta, and one of his secretary brought in the mail, disciples would write to him and Prabhupada would respond. He would listen to the letter, he would tell the secretary, tell him this, this, and this, or tell her this, this, and this. Secretary would type it up, and then they'd bring it back, Srila Prabhupada would read it and then sign it. So one day there was a life member in Prabhupada's room in Calcutta, and I was there, and he brought in the letters to be signed, and Prabhupada looked and read, and then got his pen. A, C, Bhaktivedanta. I mean, not that big, but I mean, you know how Srila Prabhupada's signature was. And the life member there was going like this, with his eyes like this at the signature, and Prabhupada said, yes. My college professors once told me, royal signature. So everything that Srila Prabhupada did was royal. It was authoritative. It was totally dedicated with tremendous strength.
Also in Dallas, they initially, when the first time Prabhupada came, there was no real place for him to, other than his room, there was no place for him just to sit outside because the weather was often warm there. And he had apparently requested that there be some facility, some garden type of area. So they created one in one of the adjoining houses in the backyard. And it was not really nice. I mean, they had Tulsi Devis everywhere and flowers and all kinds of, a little fountain. So Prabhupada sat out there in his white rocking chair. There's pictures of it in some of the old Vyasa Puja books. And so he would have different devotees read from Krishna book. So in this particular incident, Prabhupada was listening to the story of the kidnapping of Rukmini. So as the story was unfolding, it was building up, because it was building up to the point where Krishna actually snatches Rukmini and rides off with her in the chariot. So Prabhupada was getting more and more excited, because as we got to that part of the story, he was kind of leaning forward in his chair like this. And then finally, when Krishna grabbed Rukmini and put her on the chariot, Prabhupada's eyes got very big. You know how sometimes he would open his eyes really wide, and he said, and not that she was like some weak woman, he said, she was driving the chariot. He had both of his hands up like this. So I remember being really startled, thinking, wow, I don't remember that in the Krishna book. So I went back to check, and it doesn't say anything about this in the Krishna book. But apparently Prabhupada was having some type of revelation at this point about this pastime.
Allen Ginsberg brought Tim Leary to meet Prabhupada. Tim Leary, is the he started the LSD movement. Actually, Prabhupada stayed with the chemist who invented, and he was initiated. His name was Karlapati. And he was a graduate of Harvard. He was a black man, but very intelligent. And Prabhupada initiated him and stayed with him for a little while. And he was the chemist, along with Tim Leary, that invented the LSD. Carl, I forget his last name, but his... Carl Jurgens. And so... did you ever find him? No. And so Prabhupada was, when Prabhupada met these dignitaries who were in charge, he never criticized their ways. He never put them on the spot. He acted very charming. Very nice. He never put anybody on the spot, because whoever came to him, he would ask them, help me in my movement, and be very charming with them. The same he did with George Harrison. He said, you are a very important person, and people are following you. You can help me in my mission. He would actually appeal to them and try to engage them in service to Krishna, you see. And he was very charming in the ways that he would do this with anyone, a professor, a scientist, a doctor, anybody. He was never condescending or critical of their personal life or anything. No, he would only see the good things and try to engage them in that service. To me, is unhuman. A person does not do that. Usually we always look for the bad things in somebody. Prabhupada was just the opposite. In fact, if you did something wrong, he would reward you with more response. He never took things away from you. If you did something bad, he would send you out and do something more, give you more responsibility. The more bad you were, or the more mistakes you made, the more responsibility he gave you. The more he was merciful with you.
In Dallas, he was very interested in the students learning the Bhagavad Gita, and he asked the Dayananda especially to head up a program to teach them, to memorize the verses. So they would actually become very, very good at it, and they had memorized whole chapters. So several of the students stood up and chanted so many verses for Prabhupada, and then this one particular boy who was quite young, Prabhupada then asked him a question. He said, and I don't remember the particular verse, but he said, so what is the difference then, he said, between you and Krishna? And you can imagine this poor 8-year-old kid was, I don't know. But Prabhupada asked him a couple of times, what was the difference? And then he said, Krishna is pervading everything. Krishna is in all bodies, and you are only in this one body. He says that is the difference, that Krishna is in all bodies, and you are simply in this one body. So that was the distinction. He wanted the students to know the philosophy, not just to memorize the verses, just like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. When he was 5 or 6, he'd memorize the whole Bhagavad Gita, but he also could explain the verses. So Prabhupada had very high hopes.
So again in Vrindavan, 1972, we were sitting in Srila Prabhupada's room, and he was having darshan. And he had some bananas at his feet. And all of a sudden, one monkey came in, and he ran in, and he grabbed the bananas, and he ran out. And Srila Prabhupada commented on that, and he said, "Just see how intelligent this monkey is. None of you would ever dare to do that." So that was Srila Prabhupada. He could see in everything there was a lesson. There was a lesson to be learned. So that's why it was so nice to be with Srila Prabhupada, because he was an eternal teacher. He was always teaching us about this world, about our relationship with Krishna.
Prabhupada had a particular mood in Vrindavan that he was extremely attentive to detail there. Especially, he was concerned that we should not be cheated by the local merchants, that nothing should be wasted, that everybody's behavior should be, proper to the proper standard. So he was on his porch area, which is towards the back of his house there. There was a second floor porch area where he sometimes used to sit to do translation at night. And he was looking over the balcony, and from where his balcony was, you could see into the kitchen, guest house kitchen. And Prabhupada began suddenly to shout, "Stop him! Stop him!" And so there was a big flurry in the kitchen, and suddenly they grabbed a hold of this person, and they took his chadar away, and he had a huge bag of sugar that he was stealing. And Prabhupada had been the only one that had spotted it. Just with the casual glance, you could immediately understand that someone was stealing it from the kitchen. And he was chastising, that nobody was, attentive to what was going on. But he was very, very careful like that. He wanted us to learn the same kind of carefulness.
So Srila Prabhupada, in his utter humility, he was prideless. He was prideless and humble. I've seen him cry in front of devotees, asking them, "Please don't leave. I did something wrong, then now you're leaving the society. Never leave." So many of us have left, and that leaving has hurt him. And he is wanting to see his disciples working together and giving up their own selfish motivations to try to help each other. Because what do we have but a few more years left in these bodies? We're over 50, most of us. Most of us will be dying within 15 years or 10 years. Why not give it a shot one more time?
Jai! Haribo! Haribo!
That would please him. So we are here to please him.
That you brought that up very nicely about the 26 qualifications, because I used to study those 26 qualifications. And I used to try to see if myself had them, and I didn't. And I said, wait a minute, these qualifications aren't meant for me. These are Prabhupada's qualifications. And that I could check every one, yes, yes, yes. And he had all of these questions. He had all of these qualifications. And therefore, there are many instances that I witnessed where Prabhupada had these qualifications, one of which is when, he told us to go to Pakistan. I was in Gainesville, I had opened the temple, and apparently somebody in Bombay from the Arya Samaj had questioned Prabhupada why he's preaching in India. Why don't you go to the Muslim countries? So he sent me and my brother to go to West and East Pakistan. Well, somehow we made it to West Pakistan, we made it to East Pakistan, but in those days we didn't read newspapers. So when we arrived, there was a war, a civil war going on that we didn't know about. I mean, when the day we arrived, there were vehicles overturned with fire and burning, and we had to walk 20 miles into the city. And we knew there was a Gaudiya Math there, so we thought we'd try and find it and take shelter till we knew what was going on here. And so we went there, and you know, I spent over 2 months preaching, printing books there. But then the revolution got hot, and India entered, and I had to leave. And then I went to Pakistan. I didn't want to fail Prabhupada. I wanted to be successful in preaching. Then I went to West Pakistan, and it was in West Pakistan that Prabhupada got the newspaper report in Bombay that 4 Hare Krishnas were killed. So he knew I had an assistant, and he knew Brahmananda had an assistant. So I was the first to come back. And it was April 1971. It was the day of Ram Navami when I arrived from Karachi. And when Prabhupada saw me, he got up, he embraced me, and I felt all these things fly out of my body. It was the second time he embraced me, and I fell to the floor. And then he got down and pulled me up with my sika. It was like he was pulling me out of the material world. And then he slapped me on the back real hard. He said, very good, you know, he was happy to see you. I mean, he was happy. Then he called the servants and said to cook us a feast. And everybody was fasting. And we had a whole feast with puris and sabji and everybody, people couldn't, you know, they had a fast and I was eating. They all got envious. But Prabhupada he again took it as a sacrifice. That we were sacrificing our lives just on his order. You know, he saw this. And he returned that love, you know, by blessing you, you know, by pulling on your sika, by slapping you on the back. You don't know what it is to have Prabhupada slap you on the back. It's not like any slap you've ever received. You feel some spiritualness out of that. You feel purifications. You feel your heart just drop into your stomach. It's the most wonderful feeling to have the spiritual master do something, to pull your sika. I can't describe it. Because, you know, Prabhupada, although he may act like an ordinary man, was not an ordinary man. And anybody, you know, who met him felt that way. Even great scholars gave him so much respect just by his demeanor. So to have him do personal little things like slap you on the back, you know, you feel something. So he did the same with Brahmananda also.
Prema dana, karuna prachu.